Hello and welcome to the Outcomes Over Hours show. I'm Tina Patterson and today's guest is one absolutely special human being, and I can't wait to showcase and to have a conversation about some really important topics with him. His name is Jim Breen, and Jim is the founder and an executive chairman of Pulse Learning. Outside of his work though, Jim also has a very deep passion for making a difference. He has founded the organisation Cycle Against Suicide, as well as the organisation I Am Here, which you can see in the background there. And this is all about creating a healthier workplace. And so I'm sure we'll be getting into that in a little moment. Jim also, outside of all his community work as well as his corporate experience, he has a pretty impressive amount of hobbies. He does ultra marathons, Ironmans. He's also competed at international level rowing, as well as he won the British and the Irish Senior Intervarsity Boxing Championships. He's also been featured on The Secret Millionaire. So welcome to the Outcomes Over Our show, Jim.
Thank you, Tina. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, in terms of where actually I would love to start, I can see your I Am Here branding there. Can you tell us a little bit more about this, and also why mental health in the workplace is something that's so important to you?
Sure. So I'll answer that very specifically. Why the I Am Here branding is exactly here is because behind it, it's covering up rings and ropes and acro yoga apparatus. So I thought this would be a slightly better background than the gym environment. So I'm here at home at the moment in Kerry, in the southwest of Ireland. Very, very, very grateful that I live right beside the ocean. And yeah, it's interesting now working from home and being able to have an office stroke gym. So yeah, that's where I am right now. What got me interested in I Am Here and in Cycle Against Suicide and in mental health in general is a slightly longer answer. I guess that would have come from my own experience growing up in Ireland. I was born in 1970. I'm 53 years old, and I'm a very proud Irishman. I'm very proud to be Irish. Although I love, traveling and I love other cultures and countries. However, Ireland in the 1970s was grey. It was a difficult place to be different. Whether that was from your sexuality or your religion, depending on what part of the island you lived in. Certainly, it was also a challenging place to grow up when you were challenged with your mental health. And it was difficult not only because of it was probably pre-stigma. We didn't even have the language in order to have stigma. So it was something that wasn't understood. And I grew up without the language to even share, what it was I felt. And it wasn't until I was 42 that I got the opportunity to start exploring that. And that came about really through a kind of a magical set of coincidences that put me in a particular place at a particular time, where I was able to use some of the skills that I had built up to see could we change the conversation on the island of Ireland. So for 6 million people, could we get 6 million people to believe that it was okay not to feel okay and to behave in a way where it was absolutely okay to ask for help? And that was the challenge that we set ourselves. So yeah, kind of a long answer, but that was sort of my introduction to suicide prevention and to mental health in general, both societally and also in the workplace.
Amazing. And you talk about the stigma associated with mental health and how, I do think, at least from corporate Australia and corporate America, which are my areas of experience, that it has to a certain extent been destigmatized in a wonderful way. What sorts of things do you, or how can leaders help people on their teams or colleagues? What sorts of things do you say are practical things that really do help when we are looking to create a healthier workplace and normalizing mental health as well?
So it's a really challenging question to answer because, first of all, the area is so complex. This is probably the only podcast or interview I've ever done where I've mentioned the S word. And I generally don't mention it, and I don't intend to even mention it again. The reason for that, Tina, is I think inadvertently we can create certain situations, certain biases, certain lack of perceptions, certain perceptions that we think are realities. And that can go in many different directions. I think there's real challenges today, particularly for young people, not only where there's a complexity to understanding this landscape. And while on the one hand, it's such a fantastic step forward to have an openness of discussion, that openness of discussion doesn't necessarily mean that there's greater clarity. So first of all, I think it's complex. So within that complexity, how do you create a simple approach? And ultimately, at its very simplest, it's about beliefs and behaviors. So the belief that it's okay not to feel okay is critical. And I don't mean it's okay not to be okay. In fact, it's really crap not to be okay. However, we say it's okay not to feel okay, and there's a nuance there, but it's an important nuance. And then the second thing is, it's absolutely okay to ask for help. And as business leaders, you can buy into this from one of two directions, or potentially both. The first direction is it's absolutely the right thing to do from a humanistic perspective, from the perspective of compassion, listening, empathy, acceptance in your real self. It's absolutely the right thing to do from a perspective of courage and confidence. It's also the right thing to do from a business perspective, because if we can encourage people to seek help, particularly preventative help or early intervention help, that's actually got a fantastic return on investment, evidence-based argument that's been soundly won. Or perhaps you can do it from both perspectives, which is kind of the ideal. We say within I Am Here, which is our brand, which now has 850,000 people as part of it across 6 continents, 14 different languages. We say this is just good business. It's just as in it's a just thing to do, but it's good business. It's just good business. Those 3 words I borrowed from an author, Kelly McElhaney, who wrote a book, Just Good Business, around corporate social responsibility. So within I Am Here, it's the very same. It's just good business. So our clients might start the journey with us because it's the right thing to do from a people perspective, from a humanistic perspective, from the humanics. But within 12 months, 18 months, they're seeing that it's the right thing to do financially from the mechanics as well as the humanics. So I think at its simplest, encouraging people to believe it's okay not to feel okay, encouraging people to behave in a way where it's absolutely okay to ask for help. That is an evidence-based approach that will actually help within your environment, whether that's your business or whether that's your family or whether that's your community. So as complex as it is, and it is complex, and it is complicated as well, we know that that's a very simple thing we can do. So at I Am Here, what we do is we give people the courage, confidence, and those skills to be able to take that approach within a business. And it's come from over 2 decades, almost 25 years of experience with impulse learning, where we are global leaders in change through learning, cultural change and behavioral change through learning. So it's taking all of that experience and applying it within I Am Here to the area of well-being. Whereas within Pulse Learning, we can apply that to the area of systems or compliance or product or whatever the requirement might be. So it's it's an interesting place that we're in at the moment.
Yeah, I love that. And I love those concrete things that you've mentioned there also that leaders can do, because most of us aren't psychologists, psychiatrists, etc. And often I hear leaders saying, I feel like I've got to take on that role as well. And so I think just that distinction around as a leader, that person first approach is really healthy. But I also love, and it's what I've always just deep in my gut believed, which is if you start off with just being a decent human being and looking at the person, the business results flow from that, because you build up trust, you build up connection. People will go to the best of their ability and capabilities at different times if you just treat them how you like to be treated. So it's quite simplistic, but I very much believe that as a leader, the best thing you can do from a business ROI standpoint is to have that person first approach, knowing that at different times in people's work, they will be at their peak and at different times they won't be, but taking a longer term view can really help to be able to then also have those business outcomes. I'd love to, building on this, hear a little bit more about your own leadership style, Jim, and how it's evolved over your career.
Yeah. It's a difficult question to answer, because I guess if I think about it, Tina, I get embarrassed and ashamed of the type of leader I was, which
Get it? Me too.
can mean that you might be on the right track. It also means that in 10 years' time, you might be embarrassed and ashamed about where you are today. So I think the change in style has been fairly significant. You know, I began my career working in construction, and in construction, you know, it was all about back in the early 90s. And I worked in Ireland, I worked in the UK, I worked in Germany and elsewhere, and it was all about, you know, being hard, being invulnerable, you know, really going route one through people at times to get your goal, you know, get the job done. And that was, I'm going to say it was the environment, but that's not quite true, you know, because there was also within that environment, like you mentioned, you know, connection and trust and people first. We speak today within I Am Here about compassionate connection. There was also people back then, despite the fact that it was a ruthless environment, being very compassionate. I just wasn't one of them. And I think that's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is that you do certainly move from, you know, being certain about things and having you know, a firm view firmly held, to learning that you need to have a firm view loosely held. And that means that, you know, you begin your day, you begin your conversation, you begin your transaction, you begin your connection with somebody or with a project with clarity in terms of where you're going. And then you engage and you see and you listen and you adapt and you change and you let go. And certainly to be a leader today requires a different set of skills than were required, you know, when I started my career 30 years ago, over 30 years ago. Evolving, changing, learning, developing, getting it wrong, perhaps being less certain. And I guess the other part of it really is needing more than ever to be able to understand truths and counter truths and still be able to make a decision within that. You know, And my mum would have said, a stitch in time saves nine. And she would also have said, don't mend it unless it's broken. And you're kind of trying to figure out which is right. And, many hands make light work and too many cooks spoil the broth. They're all true. But you need to work out from a business perspective, how do you make decisions within all those truths and counter truths?
Oh, I've never thought of that lens before. So, yeah. So how do you reconcile that in your mind? As you say, you've got two quite directly opposing sayings. How do you think through that as a leader and come to your own opinion?
So I think the first thing is you got to understand, at least from my perspective, that your own opinion doesn't matter. And it's the wrong place to start getting it right. Instead, what you really need to do is, be thinking about, what are we trying to achieve? So very practically, I'll give you an example. We launched I'm Here 4 years ago, 5 years ago, at a time where it was very different. The idea that you can talk about mental health in the workplace and not expect people to presume that they have to be psychologists, psychiatrists, etc., like you said earlier on. So we needed to allow for that fear, allow for that concern, also allow for the fact that, our clients who were, early adopters to this at the early days were opening themselves up to be challenged, at their core, were they really good enough for this? And yet, you need to say, right, the only thing required for, was it Margaret Mead? She said the only thing required for evil to succeed is for good men and women to do nothing.
Yeah.
And, the idea that we were going to be courageous, feel the fear, be brave anyway, but get other people to join us in that journey, and to respect very much that they were going to be joining us, where we were all going to be learning together. And the reality is today we know so much more than we did when we started the journey of I'm Here back in 2018. But we also realize how much more we have to go. So our clients trust us today, but they don't trust us because of our expertise necessarily. They trust us because we're learners. They trust us because we're willing to change and adapt. They trust us because, we really work hard at trying to do what needs to be done in order to create that psychologically safe environment where people can believe it's okay not to feel okay and behave in a way where it's absolutely okay to ask for help. And as simple as that is, that requires a lot of concentration, a lot of focus, a lot of practice, a lot of skills. But then, we find that our clients, see us as their mental health and wellbeing partner, and that's great. Clients across Australia, Woolworths and Super Retail Group and Lactalis and many more clients across, North America, Europe, the same. But Tina, they also then come back to us and say, well, talk to us about this whole, hybrid work environment. From a well-being perspective, from a productivity perspective, how do we make that work? Or they'll say to us, can you talk to us about situations where, the industry that we're in at the moment is going through turmoil and we have to let people go? How do we manage that? Or we have to have redundancies. How do we manage that from a compassionate perspective? Or they say, we've had a challenge whereby we've grown and we're acquiring businesses and we're concerned about our culture. How do we deal with that? So again, the trust is that we're going to figure that out with them, but also taking all of the learnings that we have with our other clients and bringing that together in a very focused way. So again, from our perspective, it's really exciting. Like, it's a really great place to be. However, it's all predicated on trust, and if you don't have the trust, the whole lot goes.
Yeah, and trust. It's interesting. When I was I interviewed lots of executives at a lot of the largest companies around the world for my book, Effective Remote Teams. And I asked them one question, and I'm going to ask it to you in a second, which is, as we move into our new normal of hybrid, we're not always in the office together. What are the 2 to 3 skills that you think that leaders need to be able to effectively lead their teams? And it's interesting how every single executive mentioned trust, every single one. And they had differences and there were themes around the others, but that just seemed to be at the core. And yeah, so very aligned with what you're saying. So you mentioned trust. What other skills do you think that leaders need to amplify to be able to lead effectively going forward?
So let me answer it, if I may, in a slightly obtuse way. So I think there's 2 practices. One needs to be amplified and one needs to be toned down. And they both transform themselves into one skill. So the skill, I believe, is empathy. And in order to be empathetic, I believe the first thing you need to do is you need to practice your ability to be able to see it from the other person's perspective. Yeah. And in order to do that, you need to run down to silence your perceptions. And I think that within empathy, particularly as it goes to remote working, hybrid working, I speak with a lot of, my peers who've got really deeply held fears around working from home. And when you help them to see it from the context of, right, let's for one moment face our fear, lean into it, and look at it from the perspective of the team member, the employee, and tone down our perception as to what we think is going on. So that's one set. Yeah. But that on its own is only a part of the battle. I think the other part of the battle is, while you do need trust and you need to trust people, you also need to have processes and systems that can control. And I think unless those processes and systems are transparent, equitable, fair, well documented, understood, there's examples given for all the different scenarios. I think what happens is you find that it breaks down. So, just today, working with clients around simple enough things like employment contracts, and how you can figure out, to work. For example, do you pay people for a 1-hour lunch break or not in today's environment? That's an interesting question, isn't it? And try and control that, or try and look at it from the perspective of the employee, and try and turn down your perception of what's going on, and try and understand better as a result, what's right for everyone. So it is about trust. It's also about control. The Germans have an expression I don't necessarily believe in. However, it's its own truth. And their expression is Glauben ist gut, aber Kontrolle ist besser. So trust is good, but control is better. Perhaps. Or perhaps, you could say trust is good. However, without control, it falls down. So you really are, and I think it's important, Tina, that from a leadership perspective, that we don't end up with a simplistic approach to things. I think it needs to be simple, but not simplistic. It needs to be documented, needs to be clear, not simplistic. I think, the idea that you simply let people off and do, whatever they want, whenever they want, ultimately, ends in failure. That's not what people want. People want to be clear about where to go, what to do, how are they going to contribute best, and then to be trusted on making that happen. Yeah. And that's hard.
Absolutely. I often talk about guardrails. So the guardrails
Exactly.
of what things are okay, what aren't. And I'm a very systems-based person with my
Yeah.
background, Six Sigma. So if you're familiar with that, is a lot of my training coming up. And so thinking about processes, what are the controls around them, is an incredibly important piece. But I do think, to your point, that it can go hand in hand with trust, and having those guardrails and empowering people within those guardrails is important, as long as it's clear and simple in terms of for people to understand what's expected and what actually is not appropriate as well, is really, really important.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd love to get your views, Jim, on a big part of my outcomes over hours system is about working smarter. And I would love to hear, what is the best, most practical advice that you've been given and have followed around working smarter?
So I know that what we're doing right now needs to be kind of, short and concise and pithy and, helpful to people. I think the reality is that it's so, it's a bit like if you're talking about resilience and people go, oh my God, this resilience thing, I wish I could have more of it. I wish I could learn how to build resilience. I'm going, let's understand, first of all, what is resilience? I think simply put, things like working smarter. Let's understand first of all, what do we mean by that? Von Marstein and Napoleon both said, that the officers they wanted to lead their army were the lazy, intelligent ones. I
Yeah.
like that. I like that thinking.
My son loves
But
that and quotes that back to me quite often.
yeah, but being lazy doesn't mean necessarily working less hours. It just means that I want to get the best, I want to get the best return of whatever hours it is I want to invest in. And the I working with a diverse range of people, across our own team and our clients' teams, you realize that for some people, for example, those with, neurodivergence or neurodiversity, where their idea of, flow state and what makes sense for them to do in terms of a concentrated, really focused, sometimes very long period of attention where they get lost in what they're doing is absolutely the right thing, perhaps, in that moment for that person. Of course, that wouldn't necessarily work at all for somebody else. And I think the idea of working smarter is, first of all, to really understand, who are you? What does it mean for you? What makes sense for you? My father used to speak about um, the first person who became a millionaire in his village in the southwest of Ireland back in the 50s or 60s, and he handed over his business to his son, his only child, and within a couple of years, his son had spent most of the fortune, and an old woman in the village, went up to the father, one day and said, you should be ashamed of yourself. And the father's response was, look, some people like me enjoy earning money. Some people like my son enjoy spending money. How bad is that? And I think it really is important to understand that whatever it is you're doing, what is first of all smart for you before you get into it. That said, if I were to have given the simpler answer, which you can edit out that long one and give the simple one,
No, this is
it's
great.
just say no more often. Just we say yes to too many things. We find it hard to say no, but it's a skill that you can practice.
Yes, I was on a podcast earlier this morning and I was asked about, well, how do you say no? Because it's something that comes up all the time. So I would love to hear what is the practical advice that you give, particularly for people, and I'm one of them, who like to please people. You don't want to let people down. So how do you practically, be it from a mindset or actually going through with it, how do you say no?
I think and again, it depends on where you're coming from, but say, as you described yourself there, I think the best way to do it is to respectfully challenge the ask. So you're making it more about them than about you. So, for example, if you were to say to me, Jim, I'm really sorry, but I forgot to press record. Could we do all of this again right now? I would need to say to you, well, uh, is this program around outcome over hours? And if it is that the right thing do you think we should be doing right now at this hour of the night in Ireland? Or I might say, you know, why do you think it would be worthwhile? Didn't we have a great conversation, the two of us? Hopefully we did, and maybe that's enough. So I think it's about respectfully challenging the person's needs. Would be a starting point. It is easier for us to do it that way rather than just say no. I'm old enough to remember that was Nancy Reagan's slogan and tagline. And unfortunately, again, the simplistic nature of just saying no is hard for some people. So I would say respectfully challenge the request.
Yeah, nice, nice. Well, Jim, this has been amazing. To finish up, I'd love to ask you some rapid fire questions. Are you up for it? Perfect. Okay. What is the best thing that you've bought for under roughly $100?
Bought a Camino passport a couple of years ago, and that is something you buy for €10, $17, and it allows you to travel on the Camino, which is generally north of Spain or France or Portugal, where you go to Santiago de Compostela, and you use this passport to get accommodation for €10 a night.
Oh, thank you. Great tip. What is the book that you've either gifted or recommended the most to other people?
I really love The Gift by Edith Eger, and I've bought that probably 100 times for others. And I also love Good to Great by Jim Collins, which I've also bought about 100 times for other people. Yeah, that would be my probably top two at the moment, at least.
Fabulous. And what's the most fearless thing you've ever done?
Every week, I make sure I'm the weakest in the room at least once.
Love that. I love that. And finally, Jim, what does outcomes over hours mean to you?
We really just have, one very short piece of time here, and I believe it needs to be with epitaph in mind, and I think that's we leave a fingerprint on everyone we touch, and it's important that we think about epitaph in terms of our overall sense of direction and purpose, and we need to think counter truth that everybody we touch along the way, we leave that fingerprint. So we want to be conscious of that also.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, Jim Breen, thank you so much for being my guest today on the Outcomes Over Hours show.
Thank you, Tina. I appreciate it.